This is the show I'm having right now at the Buckley Center Gallery at the University of Portland. And it's always really wonderful to have work up because I have my studio is like half of a garage, a 2-car garage. And to see it, all of it up is just, there's something really wonderful about that. And so this is one view of that. And this is another one. And today I thought what I would do is go through kind of my process of making the eco prints and then turning them into paintings, and then also talk a little bit about my inspirations. And I can't help but get away too that from some of my cosmology, my worldview, and how that impacts my work. So the name of the show is The Sympathy of All Things. And what the sympathy of all things refers to is kind of the subtle mysteries of the interconnectivity of all of life. And it's actually very marvelous that you all, like as creative individuals, kind of the Leo archetype of the creative individual, come together and work within groups that are bigger, that are expanding a worldview about creativity. And so the sympathy of all things, and this is a quote from Plotinus, a Neoplatonic philosopher, but also an astrologer who Jung looked to develop the concept of synchronicity. The stars are like letters that inscribe themselves at every moment in the sky. Everything in the world is full of signs. All events are coordinated. All things depend on each other. Everything breathes together. Everything breathes together. And I particularly love that line. It speaks to so much of the worldview that I'm wanting to communicate within my work, is that we are part of nature and we're interconnected. And so much of what's going on now with climate change and with the conference starting tomorrow in Glasgow, it's a really wake-up call for us to kind of tune into that. And I feel like even with all of you doing botanical prints and very interested in botanical imagery, it really speaks to wanting to commune with that within your art, within the creative process. So this piece is called Hummingbird. And basically, when I start out, I, in general, start out with an eco print. And that process I do on raw silk. And what I do is, most of the process I use are from Botanical, the group that does dyeing. So I use their formula for scouring and for putting mordant into the fabric. And I tend to use a raw silk that is not too heavy, because I've gotten some other raw silks that are very heavy, and it's hard to get a good contact print from the plant. And I'm not really a gardener, but I have like a number of friends who are really into botanicals. And I have one friend that is a master eco printer, and I had my first experience with her, and then went on to Sitka Art Center down on the coast of Oregon and took a workshop, and then devised that I could come up with making eco prints and then mounting them on Cradle birch boards and protecting the fibers with PVA sizing. And then from there, creating, imagery, where the imagery in some ways is my form of communing with nature, of having a dialogue, a kind of active imagination, kind of call and response that occurs. And I have also too, off my porch, I've got a couple of different hummingbird feeders, and I've got a pair that particularly come to visit quite often, and they dart around, and they're just the most magical birds. In some ways, they remind me kind of like of fairies or elemental spirits. And so I wanted to put a hummingbird in there. And basically this eco print has a number of glazing on it and oil paint and I use Gamblin oil paints, and it also has some invented little floral pink flower on the lower right. So that's kind of the immediate process. And this piece is called Out of the Blue Seraph. And again, it also talks about the elemental spirits, the kind of magical nature that we had a number of really blue skies, and we have one today. And I would often, like when I take a trot outside my home along the river, and I just would envision sometimes just kind of calling out to help for angels, calling out to help, for myself, but also thinking about the state of the earth. And a seraph is a six-winged angel. And why I really like this image, and I actually used it, I found the image and I pasted it onto my art notebook, is that it also reminded me very much of a woman's vulva, and the fact that really nature is very much a feminine aspect. And so often, even all of us are born from a woman. And so there's an element where there is a divinity that I feel like that I want to revere, that speaks more to the feminine, and the feminine in nature. Mm-hmm. So this is the original eco print. And these, I usually work off of, I think they're like 45 by 36, something like that, that I'm working off of. And so then it turned into this. And the blue in this, I went a little bit wild with the paint with this, because I got a hold of Gamblin's new color. It's a blue that was invented at Oregon State, and it's very similar to cobalt, but it's a brand new blue. It's not ultramarine, it's not ceruleum, it's not cobalt. And I kind of got oh wow, this is cool. And I actually did a layering of quite a few different blues. And there's something about blue too that does make for an atmospheric quality. And often in my work too, you'll see leaves are falling, and there's kind of like a magical aspect to viewing nature. This one's called Robin, and I often have a solitary bird kind of looking around in kind of wonderment of the world. And robins are such classically spring birds that emerge from the dead of winter, and then they're very much ground feeders with the worms. But this one is kind of mediating between heavens and earth. You can see that the lower section is the horizon line, where its head is poking up into the heavens, into the cosmos, so kind of like bridging heaven and earth. And a lot of the leaves I use, I've been particularly, I use a lot of Japanese maple. You can see oak. I use eucalyptus in many different forms, and eucalyptus is really not that native to Oregon. So I can either get it at Trader Joe's seasonally, or there's another florist that actually gets some remarkable bunches. And then I also have been using the oak and geranium leaves, which they're such a wonderful shape. And I really like the leaves that have high tannin, because I want to get a really strong print. And so I often use a lot of iron bath, and sometimes it saddens the whole image quite a bit. You can see a lot of different iron marks on the prints, but I can go back in then and paint them out with, and glaze them, and kind of, when I do set it onto the bridge of the birch board, cradle boards, I'm figuring out where I want to put the composition, and then I'm dialoguing with it and hanging out with it in my studio, filling it, what does this want to turn into? What is this piece want to say to me? This one is one of my favorite new ones, and it's called Water Mandala. And of course, Jung used, really brought the mandala into modern consciousness in the magic circle in terms of making reference to one's psyche, but also that circle also within each one of you as individuals that do art, there's a vibratory morphic field that resonates out that includes all of the world. And that also speaks to synchronicity and the sympathy of all things. And one thing in my background is that I have a master's in art therapy, and for a while I was working first in social services, with drug and alcohol treatment in a jail, and then for residential care at Edgefield Children's Services for kids that were in residential, not foster care, and were having some difficulties. And one thing that was really particularly wonderful, especially when someone is upset, is to work within the circle. And I also have a background too in sand tray therapy. And so if you work within a circle, it can be very calming and it can be very centering. And it also is such a symbol of the psyche and what Jung referred to as the individuation process. So this one, I started out and I knew I wanted to work with a circle, but it's haphazard because one of the things, you guys probably know this, when I'm laying it all out, I've got to fold it up. So it's I don't know what's going to happen or what's going to shift, or even if I made a circle, in this case, I knew I wanted to work around an area that was circular, that was empty. And so then I put in some glazes to define areas, thinking about and also thinking about like a puddle, when a drop of rain goes into a puddle, there's a vibratory echo. And I love that the geranium leaves are wonderful. And I got some really strong prints in this one. It was really, and sometimes I'll amp them up a little bit more, redefine them or turn them blue in terms of my composition, because composition is very important to me. My background is such that I went to the art school here, Pacific Northwest College of Art. And I actually did my thesis in mixed media collage and oil paint, and was using a lot of Japanese papers then. I've always had an attraction to texture and especially plant, the plant-based papers. It's why I got into exotic paper making and learning how to make a mate, Mexican bark paper. So there's a final version of water mandala. And this one is called Fishbowl. And again, it does make reference to Matisse. I love his art and his way of using colors, particularly like Devencorn, who was another artist who was influenced by him, did a lot of blues and aquas and different types of colors that are in that range. But this one has an oceanic feel. And I think it really speaks to, again, I use containers quite a bit. And I was thinking about the container of one's cosmology and for us as each unique human beings, and what our worldview and how that actually is within a structure, the fishbowl, but it's also within an oceanic bigger space, the ocean being almost like the collective unconscious or something that we all share. So this one, actually, I was thinking, because I had used a lot of containers, and so I set it up so you can see the bottom. I was thinking that maybe I can put a container in there, but and so I later devised that it should be a fishbowl. And I like fish because I feel like they're very feeling creatures that are within this kind of collective sea. This one is called Sophia's Garden, and this one really has some sentimental value for me, because I was working on it, and it wasn't Sophia yet. When I first originally started, here's before and after. You can see that there were some strong prints in there, and really I could read almost anything in there. And so I thought, originally I put in from this eco print, I put in this kind of circular yin yang sign, and I had this Greek kind of stiff figure in there, and I have this, black sun in there. And I was really thinking about the myth of Sophia. And the myth of Sophia goes back to alchemy, which was very much, Jung was very much into alchemy and also astrology. He used astrology throughout his therapeutic with his patients. And so in alchemy, the myth of Sophia is about when the Godhead was, before they created Earth, there's a male and female, and Sophia is the female. And she's looking down into the creation, and she sees everything is so beautiful. She's just so awestruck that she falls down into every cell of matter. And it's very much speaks to the kind of the desecration of the feminine within our culture and within the world, and the need to redeem that and also to redeem that so that we have the relationship with a more harmonious relationship with the earth, instead of overpowering her, to work with her and to realize that we are one with her, and that she is the spark of us, is part of all of nature. And so this figure, it was during George Floyd and what was happening over like last year in the summer. And I was just really torn up and feeling a lot of it, like most of us were, just that it was such a pivotal time. And this figure looked so damn stiff to me. I just had to scrape it out and put in an African-American woman. And so I scraped it out, and I often do that a lot of times with my artwork, is I will just scrape something out. I'll destroy it because I want it to be something else. And so I sketched in, I had this picture of a photograph of a African, and I sketched it in with pastel, and then I reworked it with oil. And I'm so happy that I did that. And it was actually very satisfying to, often when you have compelling emotional events, and they might even reflect what's going on in the world, art is such a way to sublimate some of those feelings and to have a satisfactory kind of putting it in, instead of having to act out something. It's almost as if it's a very positive defense mechanism in some way to sublimate it into art. And that is even some of the foundation of what art therapy is about. This one's called Mercurial Moonlight. And I did some, when I originally started, I did the wrong one here. Let me go back here. Oh, I'm going the wrong way here. Hang on. I thought I had a picture of this one, but no, I guess I don't. So Mercurial Moonlight is, again, it's got some of the alchemist containers in there, and it's got a glowing kind of moon. And somebody was asking me about that yesterday. It just has so many layers of paint, and it looks a lot like a pumpkin or a jack-o'-lantern to me. It's almost like the face of nature coming through this, this scene, this mercurial scene. And again, it's got like, I've turned some of the, I also use sumac quite a bit. The sumac above the one at the bottom that they're reaching together kind of speaks to that tension of opposites, between the light and the dark, and the foundation, and also the green man, when you see a face in nature. So I have a lot of associations in all of my work, and often too, when I'm working on something later on, I'll find out that it gives me another message, and that it takes on new meaning as I relate to it. This one is called Healing Vessel, and it's got a symbol of Raphael, who is the Archangel of Healing. And he's shown on, if you're into the tarot, he's on the Lover's card above the two male and female figures. But this magical symbol that's off to the left is it's kind of an insignia for him that I took some liberties with. And at the time, I had a very close friend. I belong to a number of groups like you guys, but I have one group I belong to is archetypal pattern recognition. And we get together to look at patterns in life, whether it's to analyze a movie or what's happening in the world, or within whatever. And I've been participating within this group for the last 25 years. And we used to meet quarterly with Michael Caforti, who wrote the book Form, Fields, and Fate. And now I meet with his head two disciples in Portland, Shannon Pernetti and Diane Steinbrecher. And we, so, you know, one of the people in this group that I've known actually for the, you know, like a couple of years ago, she was passing, and we were all out of ourselves. We're gonna, you know, start to bring meals over there and everything. And the evening that she passed, I composed this. You know, again, it was another element of feeling such fatigue with her passing that I wanted to create something of a container, like the body as a container, and with the bird, the spirit coming out of it and being liberated and feeling at peace. So this is kind of the story around this one. This one is another vessel. It's called Birth Vessel. And I think I've got it before on this one. I particularly like that you can see it where I shifted the square, but I particularly like off the lower left-hand side, some of the imprints I was getting off of the eucalyptus. And so I really preserved that. But then again, at times I go wild with my oil paint, and I had some cobalt purple and just, you know, did layer upon layer and I tend to use a lot of glazing. And so that this one speaks to birth, and birth is a very sudden, in some ways it's very traumatic for the being that's being born. It's like, you know, lightning strikes and you go from this like wonderful womb into being born. And so this one is kind of evocative of that, and I'm playing a lot with invented shapes. This one's called Aqua Vitae, and it looks like water to me. And it's again one that I didn't alter so much the eco print. I did put like a planet in there, and I did put a lycopodium plant, because my homeopathic at that time was lycopodium. Actually, I'm still taking it. And it was such a lovely kind of almost Zen-like print and looked like water. So Aqua Vitae means water of life. And the prints on it were just so lovely. They were so strong. I don't know, you know, sometimes it's so haphazard. You guys probably know this. It's always experimentation with the eco prints. And sometimes you'll get a rich, really dark print. And often it's using the iron, but sometimes you can go overboard and it just turns into a big black mess, you know. Oh, this is the before. Mm. And here we go after. Mm. This one's called Bird Perch. And again, it's another bird that's kind of checking things out. And there's a butterfly there. And it's a sweet one. I enjoy this one. And it's got some ferns in there. I don't use ferns as much. I feel like the ferns, they come out a little bit, you know, I've been having more luck with certain leaves, and I tend to kind of go to those because I know I'm going to get really strong print. Hmm. This one is called The Birth of the World. And The Birth of the World refers to a painting that I've loved that Moreau did. And so this has some Moreau-like motifs in there. And this was done on a different type of raw silk. It's almost like, it looks like Triscuit to me. You can see the texture in it. And I did get some good ferns, strong prints in that. And then I added some other shapes that were reminiscent of Moreau's The Birth of the World, where he uses a lot of stars and a lot of moon shapes and triangular shapes. And I also put in a fish, and the fish is, I actually put down some gesso underneath the fish and where the moon is and where that triangular design is, and the starfish. And then I did an oil transfer with the fishes. So I transferred, I had a drawing, or actually I had just a picture of a fish. And I just, oil transfers are you have your drawing, and Paul Klee used them quite a bit. You roll the back of the paper with oil ink or oil paint, and then you put it down and you use a pin or some other device to just get, to transfer the image. And you get like, a different kind of effect. It has kind of the effect like this does, but so that's a technique that I've used a lot in my art. This one's dove. And again, that dove is another, I tend to use a lot of archetypes, but also mythic symbols and references to my ideas in cosmology, and my studies with trying to tune into changing my own attitude to nature as a way of contributing to helping the world do it also. This one's called Pink Crow. And I do have an example of this one before. And so, so I get a little bit wild sometimes when I do the eco prints, and sometimes I'm not happy and I'll redo another batch. And when I'm doing my eco prints, I'm after I do the roll up, I cook it, steam it for 3 hours, in which my friend who's a master eco printer says that's overkill, Lisa. But for some reason, I just have this ritual I have to do. And sometimes I'll redo and put some added plants in there just to fill out the composition. So sometimes some of them are done twice. And I think in this case, this one was. And this also, the crow was an image that I used in a regular oil painting before I started doing eco printing. And I utilized that with an oil transfer, and then I went back in and painted her. I love the geranium leaves too. They look like flowers to me. Mm. This one is called The Rabbit in the Moon. And the rabbit in the moon, actually, when we first started the pandemic, the schoolyard that has a garden was just overrun with rabbits. It was just so wonderful. I would, on my daily trot, go through that area, and I would see, rabbits, and I'd see mamas and babies. And I just felt like, God, I got to put a rabbit in one of these. And of course, the rabbit, it has such affiliations in so many cultures, indigenous and Chinese and Japanese cultures, to the moon. And you can even see, there's like, there's some images of the craters where it looks like there's a rabbit that is, and the Chinese thought they were, or the Japanese thought they were making mochi, which is a type of rice paste food that they can also turn into alcohol, I think, and elixir. And so I just got enchanted. This one was in Art About Agriculture show during the month of this summer in Oregon State and Chehalem Cultural Arts Center. This one's called Pegasus. And it's interesting because another friend of mine who's a therapist was asking me about the Pegasus image because she had a client that had a dream with a Pegasus in it. And I was looking at the Pegasus myth, and Pegasus is like such a kind of unicorn, innocent character, and the daisy is in there because the daisy has associations also with purity. But really, Pegasus, his mother was I must say Medea. It was kind of the snake-headed woman. But Medea, I'm losing my. I'm getting older here. I'm showing my age here. And so when they cut, what's that? Medusa. Yeah, Medusa had the snake-haired head, and she was she used to be a beautiful woman, but she was turned into that by, I think, Athena or somebody, shot her down. So when she was finally killed and beheaded, what sprung out was her child Pegasus, and there's associations with Pegasus with the spring of the imagination. And also too, when you think about Medusa losing her head. It's like almost as if when we tune into the imagination, we have to suspend our logical, rational, judgmental mind. And so, but he still does have that affiliation. That's his mother. And so I gave him a kind of a snake-shaped tail, and there's a snake in this. And this also, too, the global shape here reminds me very much of the way the coronavirus looks. So there's an element where nature has created this virus too. So there are many different sides to nature and life. This one's called Butterfly, and it's a shape that I adopted from a sculpture that I have from my father, who was also an artist, actually into graphic artists and commercial art. And I just love the shape. And I just thought this one had very much a feeling that the center needed something, just partially from the way I folded the fabric. And at the bottom, there's a spiral that's kind of emerging. And I think of butterflies are, another symbol for the psyche. And the spiral is about emergence and new possibilities. And that's very much the time that we're in, is, needing to allow our culture to release the old and emerge to new possibilities. This one's Fire Moon. And also last year, right around Labor Day, we were having horrible forest fires. And, in the Portland area, we in general, our air quality is great. And it was just so bad, you couldn't go outside. And it was really scary because, I go out every day and I trot. And I had to trot inside my house and do my exercise in my home because the air quality was lethal. It was really bad. And so this also has a different type of silk, actually a lot more. I only had a small piece of it. It's a very expensive silk. The color of it is more like what's in the center sphere. And so, I was thinking about fire. And again, this one makes more references to kind of row shapes. And this one actually is one of my favorites too. It's called New Moon Seeding. And another group that I participate in, especially throughout this pandemic, is meeting at the new moon and full moon with a group of women that I'm very close with. And we share much more intimately what's going on in our life and what's going on in our creative life. And the new moon is also about planting seeds of intention. And out of those seeds of attention during the full moon is when they actually come to revelation. And so this piece kind of is evocative of planting seeds, but also just again making reference to astrology and the heavens, the cosmos, and also the earth with the plants. And the eco prints on this one just came out wonderfully. Actually, I have an example of this one. They just came out really. Again, this was when I amped up. I haphazardly, in the iron bath, I don't know what I'm doing. So half the time it's like hit or miss for me. And this one, they were so strong that you can see there's a lot of saddening of the fabric, particularly around the really good prints. There's a gray saddening of the fabric, but it just was such a beautiful print. This is one of the first pieces I ever did, and it's only 12 inches by 12 inches, and it's called Primordial. And so it's after taking the workshop at Sitka, it's one of my first attempts and experimentations with taking the fabric and, how is it going to go on there? And actually, originally, when I would work on it, I was in love with Gamblin's traditional gesso. So I would gesso my boards with, it's a hot gesso, and then sand it down before I applied the fabric. And I used PVA glue for that. But this is one of the little ones I did. And this is another one, Serpent. And there's a lot of glazing, and basically there's just one central shape with some glazing on the eco prints. This one is called the Inner Life of Plants. And again, it has cosmic references, but also to kind of the mysteries of nature. And and actually studies I've had, like, there's so many books out now, the Secret Life of Trees and all these different ones. I just love them because when they actually describe some of and even to braiding sweetgrass, when they describe the biology, it's just absolutely magical. How could we not hold reverence for what nature is and has and offers us, and so this one, there's a lot, the sumac again shape is in there, and I've amped up some of the eucalyptus and some of the other shapes too. So this is the sumac, my neighbor's sumac that I used, and it was just gorgeous. A lot of the tropes, the fruits that it gives off. They look like strawberry bear plants to me. They kind of have like a bear claw, strawberry look. Well, anyway, during the ice storm, another climate catastrophe that we experienced last year, it died and they had to chop it down. I mean, it had just totally died. And I was like sad, but I also thought of like, the greening of nature, the Osiris myth, the green man in nature. And one of the, and what I was surprised by, because I'm no horticulturist and I really don't know how these plants work. This year it sprung back. It doesn't have the tropes yet, but it's just gorgeous. And I was able to, again, get permission from my neighbor to use some of the sumac leaves from there. And again, it speaks to that Osiris myth of dying, but out of that they're resurrected, the green man, or it's even the myth of Christ in that, the rebirth, the Easter from the death of winter. So thank you. That is my presentation, and I would like to, if you guys have any questions, I'm more than willing. I know that, I know actually that I was telling my husband this, that in the eco printing thing, there's some people that are very secretive about their processes and how they do things. I know that even too, like when you look at the book, India Flint's book, she doesn't really tell you anything. It's just a very pretty book. So I'm like I say, I'm not any expert on that. I'm more of an artist that's utilizing these things, but I'll welcome any questions that you might have. So stop sharing here. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was really inspiring.
That was wonderful. How did you get the colors in your backgrounds, like those beautiful blues and all that? What did you start out with your original eco print, and how did you put the blues around them so you didn't obliterate those?
Well, it's really touch and go. And some of them you saw that I kind of over painted. And part of me, I try to go slow with these things because what happens if I do something like, well, even Sophia, I have to scrape things out. But with eco prints, no, you're going to ruin the print. So sometimes what I'll start out with initially is glazes of acrylic. And very fine, and maybe I'll just, like with the Mercurial Moonlight, the one that's green with the moon in there. It was cerulean blue, and it was acrylic glazing that I put on first. So, I tend to really love oil paints better. There's something they're very plastic about acrylic paints. So eventually I will get to finally using the Gamblin oil, but you can put acrylic down and then you can paint oil over it, but you can't do vice versa. Did that answer your question, Nancy?
Yeah, it did. I looked at those beautiful colors, and you still had your prints intact, and I was just kind of wondering. And then you had your circles for the other things that you did, and you had these beautiful circles, and you're doing it on cloth, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So so every time I try to do something on cloth, I kind of get it bleeds, and you don't get those. You just have those beautiful, very clean edges on all your work.
Well, one thing too in my process, I think I mentioned this, was that once the fabric is down on the strata, the cradle boards, I am protecting the fibers with PVA sizing, again, Gamblins, which is basically, it is a plastic, but you want to do that with any time with you're using oil paint or whatever, because it protects it, because they can archetypally, it is much better for it to do that. So that, I think that helps with them not bleeding then, because if it was a raw fabric, it would bleed.
Yeah,
But
that
once that's down, then you can go in with glazing, and it's always good to go slower than too fast, because you can always add another layer, and actually that makes it more luminous.
mhm.
Mhm.
They're just gorgeous. They just have a depth to them and everything. I'm just amazed.
Thank you.
Mhm. They're stunning.
Yes.
How do you apply the fabric? Do you apply it directly to the cradle board? I assume you finish the cradle board somehow first.
The cradle boards I buy, because I don't, I mean, there's
Right.
only so much I want to do. And I was using traditional gesso by Gamlin, which again, I tend to go, they take a while. And so there's a gesso surface, which actually really helps, because if you have a luminous white surface before you put the fabric on, if you don't, it won't be as luminous, because it's still fabric, even though it's not like I think it's like 33 mummy, with the fabric that I'm using, that's raw silk. And I get that from Dharma. I use Dharma's raw silk.
Mhm.
And so that really helps then too, because then you're not just, if you put it just on board, you're going to get some of the yellowing even from the board and different things, regardless, even if it's clear glazed, because you can get clear glazed cradle boards too.
I never heard of hot gesso before.
It's a traditional gesso that goes back to frescoes and different things. And actually they discontinued it. So that's unfortunate, but oh well.
Your work blows my mind. It's spectacular.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
One
Yeah,
question
I'm
I
curious,
had
Lisa,
was,
when you
ahead.
do your print, do you have an end product in mind? Like, do you do your layout of your leaves because you already have some sort of a creative vision, or do you print and then say, what does this say to me?
Well, in the case of the ones that the mandala one, I knew that I wanted to keep it a center. I wanted to have a circular thing. I don't know what's going to happen. And half the time I never know, and I don't know what it's going to be. And then it has to tell me what it wants to be. So there's an element almost like of the trickster, which is a very good creative archetype, where you have to like let go of the control, cut your head off like Medusa, and just allow the process to guide you too. So, I mean, you guys know this because you're doing eco printing, and it is such an experiment. Your alchemist is basically, because what an alchemist is they're out of the raw materials, they're making gold, and you're making your pieces that you're working on are turning into gold.
And one thing I was going to offer, I too love the sumac. I call those little tops, I call them berries. Have you ever printed the berries?
Yeah, I have actually. In that last piece that I showed you that had a lot of speckles in there, because they print strong. So I just
Yeah.
actually threw a bunch in there haphazardly. I had to paint out some of them, but they're very strong in tannins, probably more than the leaves are. And I've also found that the leaves as fall, I often print late summer, early fall, because once the leaves start to turn red, they lose some of their tannins. They're into their own, they're showing off themselves before, before they die, so. Yeah, sumac, I really like sumac.
Yeah, it's such a great plant.
One
There's
question I had
a
was,
really fun sumac too that I put into my yard this year called Tiger Eye Sumac. If you like, it's got a very different shaped leaf, but does that wonderful sumac thing on it.
Well, I've been thinking, my husband and I are city kids, like I originally was raised in Chicago and my husband in New York. So our yard is just wild, but there is a spot where there is one spot that I've been saying, well, maybe we should get a sumac. So what's the one that you're recommending? The tiger eye?
It's Tiger Eye. It during the summer, it's like a fluorescent lime green. And the shape of the leaf is very different than what you think of as the traditional sumac. I'd highly recommend to look at it. A friend brought me one because she knew that I'd been printing with them, and I was just so thrilled. What a great gift.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sherry, what were you going to say?
I was gonna say that one question I had was, I know that you're folding your cloth over. And usually when I've seen people do that, or when I've done it myself, you get a mirror image on, one side, both sides mirror each other, but it doesn't seem like yours do that. Is that because you're painting out part of it, or do you do it in a different way?
Well, I also discovered that happened. And actually, remember that Mercurial Moonlight, the one that has the moon trunk and it's got the yin and yang thing? That's because that it printed on both sides when I folded it over. But then I put down plastic in between some layers, because when I'm doing, sometimes I'm using iron cloths where I just put the iron cloth down there to get a stronger print. And otherwise everything, that's on the other, and I'm folding it in half and rolling up the edges. But sometimes I'll fold it for the center things. I'll fold it kind of into the center a little bit differently, but most of them are just in half.
Okay. Yeah, I like that effect, that the mirror effect. It has a place, but I don't want every single print I make to look like that.
Yeah, I think using a barrier serves a really important purpose then.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it could be paper or plastic, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Stunning.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I think this probably was already shared in one of the emails that Sherry forwarded us to get us ready for the meeting. And I think I probably clicked on it because I did see some of the work in advance, but you do have a website, do you not?
LisaBrinkman.com, and actually all of the work is up there now, except I haven't, my webmaster, my husband was out of town on business, so we still have to change over, because my last show was Chehalem, and then I've got the new pieces I added to it, but I need to change it to Buckley, and also put up, I've got a new version of my artist statement that that adds a little bit more. I mean, it's very similar, but it's a little different.
Mm-hmm. Great. Good.
Oh, and there's also too some videos that show me wrapping up and unfolding the deal. So, my husband did some of those last year, videos that kind of, I don't know if they show that much. It's just kind of fun to see that, everything fast,
Mm-hmm. Fantastic.
Any other questions for Lisa?
Hmm.
One question I always like to end on, Lisa, is what advice would you have for a beginning echo printer or beginning artist in general, if you want to broaden it, but what thoughts or advice or suggestions you might have?
Well, I think it kind of like the Medusa myth, get out of your own way. Because, I have a strongly critical, logical thinking. And sometimes when we're in a process, we'll say, oh, that looks crummy. Well, sometimes, no, you can take it and transform it. And probably Jane, you mentioned that basically that the fact is, sometimes when you're working on something, and if you spend more intention with it, it transforms. And sometimes too, you have to let go of things too. There are times where, okay, no, I'm not going, I have no energy anymore for this one. It's off on the shelf or whatever.
It's like a bad boyfriend. You just have to let it go and get over it.
Yeah. Well, it is kind of like that, because what is it in the Jungian concept? What bridges the unconscious with the conscious mind is the animus for a woman.
Yeah.
And so it is kind of like it's a little affair we're having with ourselves,
Yeah.
in process.
Absolutely. Cool.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Lisa, and you're very welcome to join us for the rest of the meeting, but if you need to leave, that would be fine too. But